You have to really focus down on what you do well and niche down. I always say the riches are in the niches, and you figure out what it is that you do really well and be the best at it.
You're listening to the Profit by Design podcast, episode 13. You work hard in your business. On the Profit by Design podcast, we ask the big question: what has your business done for you lately? Hi, I'm Dr. Sabrina Starling, the business psychologist, the author of How to Hire the Best, and your co-host on the Profit by Design podcast. Weekly, my co-host, Mike Bruno, and I bring you tips, tools, and strategies from our own experiences and from the experiences of our guests, who are entrepreneurial thought leaders and real-life entrepreneurs, all to support you in making intentionally profitable and sustainable business decisions to live the lifestyle you desire. Hey, Profit Designers. In just a few moments, you're going to listen to a conversation between myself and Dave Sullivan. Dave is the host of the Roofer Show podcast, and you might remember that he recently had me on his show. Now, I've been enjoying listening to the Roofer Show because Dave is very much like Mike and I. He's all about not being the biggest guy in town, but being the most profitable. And that's what I really enjoy about his podcast, because he brings on guests that really help you think through how you're going to create a profitable roofing contractor business. But as you know, so much of what we teach that is specific to one industry applies to another. So I highly recommend the Roofer Show podcast. You can learn a lot there. But I want to share with you a little bit about who Dave is and why I'm bringing him on the show today. Dave has been a successful roofing contractor for over 30 years, and he's done over $150 million in sales. Now, that sounds fantastic, but I want you to know Dave didn't start out that way. He has not had it easy. And on today's show, when I bring him on for the interview, he's going to share some of the things that he's learned from the School of Hard Knocks. And he's going to share with us his one-page business plan, which is a perfect tool to be looking at right now because, hey, we're going into 2019 and we need to start planning for the year ahead. So stay tuned, because at the end of the episode, Dave will share with you how to get your hands on his one-page business plan. So let's get started. All right, Dave, I'm so excited to have you here with us on the show. You have been a roofing contractor for over 30 years, and you have lots of School of Hard Knocks experience, and you currently have your own podcast now, The Roofer Show, which I love. I've been on there. I've been listening to some of your episodes. You've had some great guests. I learn a lot. And I'm very aware that as you started out in business, you did not have a smooth start. You had a very rough start coming into the business, and you learned some lessons. And I'd really like to get our conversation started there. So can you take us back and tell us about the early years in your business?
Since Well, thanks so much for having me on, Sabrina. I really appreciate it. Yeah, you're right about some hard knocks. Came out of this pretty nicked up, but since retired, and started the podcast and really enjoy it. But my story, I grew up in a small roofing business. My father, we probably had maybe one or two crews. And I would work on the roofs on the weekends and during summer vacation, tearing off roofs. But I went to business school at University of California. And the plan was, when I got out of school, I'd come into business with my father and he'd teach me the ropes. So when I graduated, it wasn't long before my father had a heart attack and he wasn't able to carry on the business. So I pretty much had to step in, and I did not know what the heck I was doing. Here I'm educated and so forth, but it's a lot different than what you learn in school. I'll tell you, it was really tough.
school did not teach you how to be an entrepreneur.
No. No.
That's my experience too.
Yeah, when you're working with widgets and various make-believe products, it is just not the same. And where I think I really had the problem was coming out, I had the big ego, thought I knew it all, but I didn't know anything. And particularly when it came to working with our people, working with the roofers, I just didn't have the respect that my father did. And so they just, let's say they didn't give me much help. They didn't make it easy for me. And I don't blame them because I was a real jerk. So that was one of the first lessons I learned. But
whoa, hang on. Stop right there. I can't let you get away with calling yourself a jerk. What were you doing that they were reacting to?
Well, I really didn't know much about roofing work. And, but I thought I did. And I'd kind of tell them, well, hey, we got to do this, we got to do that. And I think I came across a little too cocky, and they were resentful. They felt that I didn't treat them with the respect that I should have. And they were right. So it was not easy. And it really didn't take long before I started running the business into the ground. We had a tough time. I could sell the work, but once you're juggling all the various tasks of running a business, this is what you're unprepared for, is that there's just, fires constantly. And that's one reason I just didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't prepared. So you spend most of your day putting out these fires, and next thing you know, customers aren't happy. They're yelling at you. You start running into cash flow problems because you can't get the jobs finished out. And it was just a real tough go. So that was the start of my career.
So when you say fires, I get the sense that a lot of those fires were related to the team and the systems. That, having the buy-in from the team, but also having the systems in place. Is that accurate?
That would be. And there really weren't systems in place. And, my father ran a great little business, small business, but he had a rake structure of management where all the decisions came through him, and didn't really build the systems or put the people in place with the processes of what to do. So when I came in, I think the problem was that he was taking the people and then designing the process around them, rather than taking the process first and finding the people to fill those positions. So we're just dependent on a few people. And when he wasn't there, it just didn't work. I mean, everything was in his head. So we didn't have those processes. So I wasn't able to just step in and carry on. That was a real struggle.
I can imagine. So obviously you found your way through that problem. You have a successful business that you ran for 30 something years. What did you realize that you needed to help you with that problem? And then what did you do?
Well, what I needed was help. And I was talking to some of the older guys, that had been around for a while, other contractors, and they suggested a consultant, business consultant. And I hired him, and we took a step back, and he asked the questions that really need to be asked, and where we're going to go with this business, what I wanted it to be. And we stepped back and put together a business plan of where things would go, what kind of people we needed, how do we add the processes in. And over time, we honed that process and we worked that plan. And eventually, we started really accomplishing a lot. And by using that business plan, it changed everything.
Wow. And I know that is something that you utilize to this day with your clients. So tell us about it's the one-page business plan. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, that's something I came up with really for my podcast. And contractors are so reluctant. Nobody likes planning and the idea of, hey, we're going to put together a business plan. Nobody likes that. It's going to be all of these numbers and it's going to be so difficult. And when I ask contractors, why don't you have a business plan? I go, well, it's too much trouble. I'm doing okay as I am, or they just don't know how to get started. So I designed this plan, which is really just a short concise, ask the questions that you need to answer. And there's a fillable PDF on the last page. And it's one page, and you fill in the blanks basically, and you really have a pretty good idea of where you want to take this business and how you're going to do it. And I think the most important thing that this does is it gets contractors started on what I call, what would be the process of planning. And just that's where you're thinking these questions through. Where do I want to go with the business? How am I going to get there? What do I need? And we just really put some, take a step back, see the forest through the trees, and put this plan together. And it's worked really well for my contractors.
So first off, I want to acknowledge you for that, because you've taken something that feels very complex for a lot of us to step back and plan and figure out what we want that to look like. And anytime you can take something really complex and put it into one page, it takes a lot of thinking. So kudos to you for that. But I imagine that also brings a lot of clarity to the contractors.
It really does. And as I say, it's the process. It's just asking those questions and some of the things they really don't think about. And this is what changed my business around totally. For instance, one of the items there was what happened in our business was that we did some commercial work. We did residential. We were somewhat everything to everybody. And that is no way to run a business. You have to really focus down on what you do well and niche down. I always say the riches are in the niches, and you figure out what it is that you do really well and be the best at it. And once we broke out those two separate divisions as basically profit centers, we could see, my consultant showed me by looking at the numbers, that we were actually losing money in the residential end of this business. And it was dragging down our commercial, which is where we were very profitable and really had that down. So we dropped the residential, focused 100% on commercial. And once we did that, business just took off. My life became much easier. Everyone's did. Yeah.
You found the sweet spot. I've worked with a lot of folks in the construction industry and contractors, and the commercial versus residential question comes up quite a bit. And I really appreciate what you're describing, because you're breaking it down from a numbers perspective. And oftentimes I hear, we need the residential to set off the lulls on the commercial side, or vice versa. And the kind of the gut feeling, like running the business on the gut, versus let's look what the numbers say and what do the numbers show us.
Mm-hmm. And in our case, it's easy enough to see what the profitability, what in construction, what our gross margins are. But the overhead structure is different, because we found that one, we had a lot more callbacks on our residential work. You've got more phone calls. So your administrative office is getting tied up more with the residential, more small jobs. We got the broken rose bush to deal with, and it's a different thing. So when you're coming off with a huge project, which we would go back and forth, you move this crew onto Mrs. Jones' home, and they're used to just banging out these production jobs. So it was a real difference. And so we could see that amount of supervision, the cost of supervision was much higher as a percentage. So you've really got to look at, and that's why I say it's almost, you set it up as a different profit center with its own costs, and you can really see what's going on. And that's something that we talk about all the time is, okay, well, if you're going to run, like for what we did, we did all commercial work, but we had a large maintenance division, and this was really profitable end of the business. So we broke that out as a separate division. We had different people doing that, different salespeople, and different marketing. It's really a separate business. And we set it up that way. And when we did that, you could really track it and see, what's going on.
So paying attention to the numbers and really tracking was key. And you continued to hone and refine. It sounds like once you got a sense of, here's the direction we need to head, we need to get rid of the residential, we need to do just commercial. And then you continued that process of tracking your numbers, and then you refined it even further. One of the things that you said, a light bulb just went off in my head, and you talked about bringing your crew off of a commercial site and then taking them over to Mrs. Jones' house to bang on the roof over there. And I thought, wow, that's a huge context shift. And one of the things that I've learned in recent years is the loss of efficiency that we have when we individually do context switching. So like entrepreneurs, we wear multiple hats, and, one moment we're working on marketing, another moment we're handling a customer complaint, another moment we're trying to sell a project, and then, 10 minutes later, we're somewhere working on the project. That's a lot of context shifting, and a lot of inefficiency comes in. But the light bulb that went off is, wow, that affects us on an individual level. But when you're talking about an entire crew making those context shifts, that's pretty significant. And that's a significant loss of efficiency in a business.
Mm. Well, it's like this, you hear all the time where people, including entrepreneurs, will say, oh, well, I'm a great multitasker. Well, we know that, study after study shows us that is not true. So you end up, rather than doing something really well, you end up doing everything pretty mediocre, and it doesn't work. And so when you focus your energy, your attention on just one thing at a time, it makes a huge difference. And that's one of the items of my business plan. I really go after, rather than make a big list of to-dos, I want to focus on the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference in our business. And whether that's maybe coming up a process for our salespeople, or whether that's maybe setting up a service department. But by having that process and sticking with that one thing, coming up with the steps involved with it, assigning it to one person, and making sure that we have a completion date, we can track that. And that's the one thing that's been successful for me, is that rather than trying to do all of these various things, here's my to-do list of 1,000 things, that's just overwhelming.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And so through the one-page business plan process, you're bringing those business owners to focus on that one thing that's going to have the greatest impact. And then once they complete that, then you're moving them to the next thing and the next thing. So let's go through the different areas, because you hit on multiple areas in that one-page business plan. So can you walk us through what's included?
Sure. Yeah. And it's really broken into 8 steps. The first issue is that you have to convince them that they actually do need a business plan. But once they're bought in, so, okay, I get it. Well, here's an easy way to do it. And I've got a download on my website also that's easy to do. You can do it, you can download it. It asks you the questions. It's real simple. But step number 1 is to start at the end. And this is your destination. And by doing that, we can see where we want to go, and then we can reverse engineer a roadmap to get us there. And what I mean by the end is, so few people think about that. There will be a time where you're going to exit this business, and it may be voluntary, which hopefully it is. You're going to sell the business, or to your family, or to an outside investor, or it could be involuntary, which is what happens with most contractors. They just end up closing the doors because they haven't built the business up to be saleable. And that's unfortunately the problem, because here you work 30 years, whatever, you build up, you've got a good business, so you think, but there's just not much value to anybody else. So by starting at that end, particularly when it comes in, for instance, you want to bring your family in, your kids. So that's one way that's going to take a lot of time to train these people, train the kids to be able to actually take over this business so you can exit, kind of like the situation that I was in, where definitely weren't prepared for that. Or if it's an outside investor, you got to realize that what's that company worth when you're not there anymore? And it's zero if everything's reliant on you and you don't have the systems and processes. So does that make sense? That's where I always start at the end and work backwards.
Absolutely. And what you're saying about imagine this business without you, and what's the value? That's a big question to contemplate. It's eye-opening to think that through.
And to prepare a business for sale, which is what you want to do. You have two reasons to be in business, which is one is to provide a good lifestyle for you and your family. And two is to build a saleable asset that you can sell that's going to support you through your retirement. And those are really the two reasons that I always tell. So if we're going to build something up for sale, it could take us 10 years to do that. So we need to get started. And those are the things that we're going to put into place by, setting up these systems and processes as we go.
Okay. So what's step 2?
Okay. Step 2 is what I call the customer. Okay. And it's the what, the who, the where, and the why. And the what of the customer is, what is it that we build? What do we do? Do we do residential? Do we do commercial? Maybe we do gutters, we do siding. But I work with a lot of contractors and they're just all over the board. They're trying to sell, they're trying to be everything to everybody. So we want to focus down on really what it is that you do well. And that's what we talked about having our costs. But the who is, who's your ideal customer? You really have to understand them because you don't want to work for everybody. You need to identify, what's that number one customer that you have that you love working for? And how do we get another 100 of those rather than spending our time with tire kickers or people that, are only interested in low price, for instance. So we've got to come up with the qualities of that ideal customer and what kind of person that is.
Okay, Dave. So you've got 30 years of business experience. You built a business around your ideal customer. I want to know, because I imagine a lot of our listeners are thinking, yeah, I have that one customer that I like. I don't think there's 100 of them out there. What would you say to that listener who's got that running through their mind?
Well, there are, because every contractor has some of those, right? So they're out there. You just have to go find them. Or more importantly, they have to find you. And what we found is these guys are always constantly changing. They have a problem with their contractor because most all of these guys screw up at some point. So you want to be there in the waiting. You want to be contacting these guys because we can find out who they are. In our case, we dealt with investors. We wanted people that own their properties, that had multiple properties, and were investors and holders of property. So we weren't looking at general contractors or property flippers. We wanted somebody that was interested in buying value for the long term. And so by focusing on those guys, hey, they're all over the place, so we just need to find them. We need to keep in contact with them and reach out and make sure we're marketing to those type of people.
Okay. So this just went through my head, this analogy that it's like, and I think I actually heard you say this on your podcast, so I'm going to give you credit for it. It's like when you decide, you know what, there's no purple cars on the road. And then as soon as you start looking for purple cars, you'll find them. And maybe not purple cars. Maybe we need to say orange. Orange is a more popular color these days. So there's hardly any orange cars. But if you start looking for orange cars, you'll see them. So when you have a clearly defined ideal customer avatar in mind, it's much easier to spot them all around you.
Right. And then what's important, the last part of our customer is the why. Why would they buy from you and not your competitors? And this is when we get talking about what separates you from your competition and makes you better. What's your unique selling proposition? What differentiates you from your competitors? Because if you can't show your prospects why you're different, then you're just a commodity and why wouldn't they just go with the lower price?
Well, and that's such an issue bidding projects because it feels like everybody's just going after the lowest price. But you're saying if you have something that really makes you unique and different, you're not going to be competing on price.
That's true. And we can see by studies that, over time, price is pretty far down the list. It's actually down in the 5th, 6th, 7th reason why people buy really home services. It's not as important, but if everybody looks the same, why wouldn't they go with the lower price? That's why you need to show them why you're different. Now, for instance, in roofing, well, Mrs. Jones, are you aware that roofing is the number one complaints for the Better Business Bureau? Because here are all the problems that can occur, and this is how we're going to avoid those. Or let's just go through the Yelp reviews, all those 1-star reviews of where customers, these guys screwed up and made the customer's life miserable. And that can really happen. It's not like painting the wrong color. If you screw up in roofing, your roof's going to leak.
It's a bad deal.
Exactly. So we need to show them those things. And this is why we're different. This is how we avoid all those things. Plus, we've been in business for 20 years. Here's our list of, our referrals and with their phone numbers, satisfied customers, testimonials, social proof. We've got that. We can show them why we're different and why we're worth the extra price because we're giving them extra value.
Okay. Wow, this is really good. So I want to hear more in the rest of the steps in the one-page business plan. And I know you have a special gift for us at the end, but let's take a moment here and hear from our sponsors for today's episode. This episode of the Profit by Design podcast is proudly brought to you by Contractor Business Solutions, the Small Business Consulting Group, and Tap the Potential, the home of How to Hire the Best and the 4-week vacation program. Visit our website at profitbydesignpodcast.com to learn more about our sponsors and to catch previous episodes of the podcast. And by the way, while you're there, be sure to check out the conversation between Mike and I that 95% of entrepreneurs never have. We blow up the dirtiest little secret in the entrepreneurial world. Okay, Dave, we're back. And I want to keep digging into this one-page business plan. So far, I know that I need to have a vision. I need to know what the end is in mind. I need to know who my ideal customer is. I need to have my niche and what I'm selling. And I need to know how I'm different so I'm not competing on price. What's next? What else do I need to be thinking through?
Well, step number 3, usually about this point where we learn in business school is that, you've got to have a mission statement, right? So a mission statement is, it really tells what you do, how you serve your customer. And we spent a lot of time developing our mission statement. We put it up on this plaque. We stuck it up on the lobby wall. It wasn't long before everybody forgot what it was. So it's like, what good is that? What I prefer to do is develop an elevator pitch. And a lot of us know what an elevator pitch is. But it's basically, you meet somebody at a conference or wherever, and they ask you what you do. And generally, everybody's like, well, they're not prepared for this, to give them a good answer. But with the elevator pitch, it really focuses you down on the same as a business plan, but it's what's the problem that you solve? How do you do it better than your competition? And what action do you want this person to take? And the goal should be to develop a conversation where you want the person you're talking with to go, really? Well, tell me more. And that problem, like I said, was, what we do is we solve the problem where we get all 5-star reviews as opposed to, what else is going on here. And you may not be aware, but there's all of these problems, and this is why roofs fail, and this is why, people get ripped off all the time. And we solve that problem because we've been in business so long, and we have steps to prevent these things that we've honed over the years. We have all of these satisfied customers that we can show you. And then the third, what action do you want them to take? Well, generally I'd say, hey, if you're interested, we have an ebook that is the top 10 ways to find a contractor that you can trust, for instance. Now, if you give me your email, I'll send this to you. And so you've gotten this, you've told them what you want them to do. Or, can I get your phone number? I'll give you a call. Or do you know anybody that might be interested in needing a new roof? So this would be the type of thing. And that's kind of the elevator pitch. And it's just having that prepared But again, it's like the mission statement gives you a focus. I call it the focus because it really hones down on what you do, how you do it differently, and what action would you like them to take, as opposed to heading for the door going, this guy's a snooze, I'm out of here.
Yeah. So you're giving them something of value, and you're also describing a way that a contractor who has a website, you're not going to lose the visitors. You're putting something on the website that's going to help them, that they would want to know, like, here's the top 10 things you need to consider when you're hiring a contractor. And in exchange, they're going to leave their contact information, and then you can follow up with them.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Okay. So what's next?
Well, we've got step 4, and that's what we call the SWOT. And a lot of people may be familiar with a SWOT analysis, which is what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we would go through those one at a time. What are your strengths? Well, we have a great sales department, or we have really good trained production crews. Well, what are your weaknesses? Well, we may be weak on one of those, so we may need some help, or we may need to just work around our weaknesses and focus on our strengths. Opportunities. Well, maybe there's a new product on the market, or maybe there's a new market that's opening up that we want to go after. But these are the things that we want to talk about and think about again in this process of planning. And then what are our threats? Well, the threats, I think one of the big threats is, I believe, the economy is going to start to turn. And here's everybody just, going gangbusters and so forth, but they're not thinking about preparing for these times. And what happened in the last recession was that, weren't prepared or out of business. Those that did, they thrived. But various threats, new competitors coming into town, could be a number of things. But we've got to talk about this and really go through it. Make sense?
Okay. Absolutely. Yes. Okay. What's next?
Step number 5 is what I call the operation. And this is really, I think, the key to business. And it's really not that complicated, because it all comes down to you have to sell work, you have to do work, and you have to keep score. So if we take a look at, the 3 legs of a stool, we've got to keep this stool sturdy. And so we've got to have a good sales department and marketing. We have to keep our sales strong, but we also have to do the work. We have to have a good production department. And the 3rd leg of the stool is that we have to have a good keeping score, scorekeepers, our accounting department. Because what tends to happen is, like right now, for instance, we've got so much work, we don't have the people to do it. So that production leg is getting a little weak because we're forgetting things. We're not working efficiently. Now, also what's happening is, by doing so much work, accounting's not able to get the invoices out. They're running too slow. We're not able to get good costing information. So the jobs are starting to slip, and we got a lot of slippage on our jobs. And one of those legs tends to be weak, and we've got to look at each of those to keep them strong, because there's always, one of the legs is going to be weak. You may not have enough sales, but here now you got all these guys that you hired and they're sitting on the bench, and it's always one of those. So in that operation, it's really looking at each of those areas and making sure that they're strong and that we've got a solid 3-legged stool.
Okay. So as you're going through this, I'm already getting the idea that the one-page business plan is not a once and done deal. This needs to be repeated on an ongoing basis to analyze these things.
And it's a process, and that's why we call it. It's the getting used to the process of planning, because we're always changing. We're always adding to these things. And, I like that quote by the boxer Mike Tyson, he says, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Okay. So you got to be able to adapt, and you got to be able to change your plan. And it's constantly changing. But having this review, having it written down, now maybe next quarter, we're going to sit down and do it again. But we would go away on a retreat, take everybody out of the office, all the key players, and we'd do this away from the office and involve your key people. It's important that you do that. And the benefits of having a plan are, not only do you really have your act together, but you're able to show your people that You actually have the confidence, you know where you're going, you're going to provide the leadership. And that's what they want to see. They don't want to see a company that's, really doesn't have their act together. And this is a key tool that you can use to really keep your people happy.
Yes. And so it sparks a lot of conversations that I'm imagining in a lot of businesses. These conversations aren't typically happening because everybody's so busy doing the work. And this plan creates that conversation of let's step back and let's look at what's really going on. Exactly. Okay. So what's the next step?
Yeah, let me just blow through these. But the sixth step is what I call the process. And I know you've got a very similar thing, with the people that you work with. But I always say, hey, you just won a 2-week vacation free to Maui. But the only hitch is you've got to leave next Monday. Okay.
Oh,
now
I'm ready to go.
That's right. But very few contractors are able to do that because they're chained to the business. They know that if they were to leave, that business would fall apart. And by having that clear in your mind, how do we build our company that we can take that last minute 2-week vacation? Because when's the last time most of these contractors took a 2-week vacation? Probably never.
Never. Maybe exactly. A 3-day vacation, but 2 weeks. Oh my goodness.
That's right. So that's where we get into, building those processes and systems where you've got, here's what everybody's doing. You've got your operating manuals, that everybody knows what the job is. And when you have these positions laid out in advance, then you're able to hire the best people for the position. And once you get people in there, you've trained them well, you've trained them to take responsibility. Now, get the hell out of the way and go take your 2-week vacation. I'm going to let them do their job.
Exactly. And what I love about what you're describing is that this would also be a team conversation, possibly, of, what happens if I'm going to take a 2-week vacation? How do we get things done around here? Mm-hmm. And what does that look like? I actually had interviewed another business owner who, back from his 4-week vacation, now is working with team and getting them ready for their vacations. So it's not just about the business owner taking the vacation, but there shouldn't be anybody in the office that can't take a vacation.
Exactly. And when we talk about looking at the end, which is how do we work ourselves out of a job? Okay. How do we put this in a position where this company does not rely on me and it has value to an outside investor? That's what we're talking about here, is having the systems in place where you can get out of the way and everybody else knows what to do. So I like that. And step number 7 is called the action. And that's what we talked about, that one thing. What's the one thing? And I think we covered that rather than having this big long list of, multitasking.
So that's really, you go through all these steps and then you look at what's my area that needs my attention, or what's the low hanging fruit that I'm going to start to work on in this next period.
Right. And
okay.
Again, it's really just the focus. What's the most important thing that we can do? Right. It's not the only thing, but it's the most important. And that's where we want to focus our efforts.
Got it.
But the step number 8, and the final step, is what I call the view. And this is where I know so many contractors, and I'm sure many business owners, they finally get to that pot of gold, that retirement. They're able to get out of their business, but they get there and they don't like what they see because, all they did was work all their life. So they miss that action or whatever. So you're sitting around driving your spouse crazy, or you don't have any hobbies or friends outside of the business. And I see this so often where it's like, well, now what do I do? And so you've got to make sure that when you're getting to the end, and this is what really creates a lot of problems for exit strategies also. It's like, okay, you're going to be out of here. What are you going to do? You want to make sure that you like the view. When you finally do make it to the top of that mountain, you're looking down. Do you like what you see? And so often they don't. And it's kind of like, wow, I'm just, I miss my business.
So This is the first time I've ever heard any business strategist or consultant talk about, as you're planning your business on your one-page business plan, the last thing you need to consider is what's it going to be like when you're at the end and what does it look like? So what I love about what you're doing is you are planting the seed maybe years in advance of a contractor or a business owner exiting their business and saying, let's start thinking now about what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully it's years in advance, because far too often it's somebody that's older that's finally getting to the point that says, oh, hey, I've got to get out of this business. One, I've been so beat up, by this business. It's been so difficult that I just want to get the hell out of here in one piece. But you don't have the time. Time is your friend when you're trying to develop an exit strategy, because it does take a long time. And this is why it's so important to start early with the planning process. And that's what happened. I was fortunate enough to fail pretty quickly, and I had some great help, because my plan was a little different. What I wanted to do was travel. My father was someone who's, when I retire, I'm going to go to all these places, but I can't right now. I've got too much going on. But when I retire, I'm going to do all these things. Well, I could see that, and I didn't want that to happen to me. So I wanted to travel. I wanted to watch my 3 boys grow up, to be there, to have the time to do that, rather than just constantly being chained to the business. You're working those 60, 80-hour weeks like most contractors. And I didn't want to do that. So you've got to plan for that. So that's how we got the process, the people in place early, where I could take that 2, 3, 4-week vacation that we've talked about.
Very, very nice. And, on the Profit by Design podcast, that's really what we are all about, is designing a sustainably profitable business that supports the lifestyle you desire. And you just walked us through an 8-step plan that fits on one page to do that. I love it.
Well, that's what it's about, isn't it?
It is.
That's why we're doing this.
Yes,
running
absolutely.
These businesses.
And I know you have a wonderful gift that you want to share with our guests. So could you tell us about this?
Well, you can go to my website at theroofershow.com. Go to homepage. It says listen now. You can go to any one of the podcasts. Check them out, take a listen. But also on the sidebar, there's a number of downloads that you can get. There's some selling tips. I've got a newsletter, but also, I've got that one-page business plan that you can download for free. And you can take this. It's only, maybe 10 pages long, but it asks you the questions that we've gone over here today. And on that one page, you can just go in there and fill that out. And there's not a lot of room on there to fill these answers in. And that's for a reason, which is to really get you to focus, and hone it down until it's a real tight answer. And once you've got that, you can do this in, just a couple hours really to get you started. Again, it's getting started on the process of planning. And that's what this download can do for you.
Wow. That's so incredibly generous of you to be giving that away. And that is very, very valuable. I know that some of our listeners will be doing this, and I imagine it's going to have a great impact on how they think about their business. And, we're coming on to the end of the year and the new year coming. It's a perfect time to be doing something like a one-page business plan. So Dave, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I appreciate you being a guest on the podcast today. And you mentioned that your website is the Roofer Show Podcast. So that's the Roofer Show Podcast. Or what's the URL?
theroofershow.com.
theroofershow.com.
And it's just not for roofers. It's really for any business owner, but particularly contractors, those in the trades, but this particular plan really applies to any business.
Oh, absolutely.
Or anybody that's thinking of going into business. That's just, it's just something that will organize your life or your career.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure none of our listeners are thinking about going into business because of the stories that we tell on the Profit by Design podcast. They've heard those stories and they're like, no, not for me. Our listeners are the diehard business owners who've been at this for years. But that one-page business planning process, I think that is so critical. And like you said, even if you're contemplating business or you've been at it for a while, it's going to be a very helpful tool. So thank you again, Dave. I'm glad you could join us.
Well, thanks so much, Sabrina. I really enjoyed it and love your podcast also. Keep at it.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending time with us today. Join our conversation in the Profit by Design podcast Facebook group. Share your thoughts on today's episode, ask us questions, and let us know what you want to hear about next. Visit our website at profitbydesignpodcast.com to access resources from our sponsors and tools we've created for you. Subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening to right now. There's a subscribe button right there. Go ahead and hit it so that you always get a notification when we release a new episode. And finally, share our podcast with a friend if you know a friend who would enjoy it. Thanks again for listening. This is real life business. Keep your chin up, keep moving forward. You got this.